what's the word? Skeptical. But in history, these men could be brought back home if they were not going to vote appropriately, if they went outside the guidelines they were given when they left home. So these women can be given a guideline. They're called commissions. That's why they're called commissioners in history. 22 conventions before the founding, 11 since, has worked every way. The most recent is called the Colorado River Compact. Members of the states that were around the Colorado River met. They followed the exact same. They have commissions. This is what you can do. This is what you can't do. It's in history. And the Supreme Court says history matters. But we have to have an organization to guide this delegate selection process. I traveled 6 hours, really not because I need you to get involved for the call Article 5 convention. That's going to happen. I hope that you get involved. I hope that you go on the website. I hope that you're on the Monday night calls every Monday night to know what's going on. But I really need you for the next step. And you know what? I need Eagle Forum. I need all the people who are against it to be on our team when we start selecting delegates. That's why I don't want to defame them. I don't want to call them names. Too much. But my point is, we have to be on the same team. You know, it's so sad to be a legislator and watch people come from your district, walk in, I'm talking about conservatives, and all of them that walk in this room, when you go to your legislator and you come in and you agree on the Second Amendment. No dissension. And you walk in your legislator's office and you agree on right to life. But on Article 5, people go through the door, they come in the door, and they go in, some in that corner and some in that corner. Why? The liberal establishment was very effective in scaring people and relabeling the convention, of Article 5 convention, as a constitutional convention. They scared people. People are still scared. But this nation was not founded on fear. Other questions? You had one. Brian had the next one.
Didn't I get something in the mail from the Citizens for Self-Government on this?
Probably. You might have, if it was Mark Meckler. Yeah, possibly.
Is that who you're with?
Citizens for Self-Governance is the organization that, and I'll flip through these. That's where I was going, so you can see the people who's behind it. But yes, the folks who are behind this organization, one of them is Mark Meckler, and we'll get there sooner or later. I've got too many slides here. Anybody here know all these people? Some of you know one, most of you know three. Y'all know, who's this? Everett Dirksen. He's an Article 5 proponent. He fought hard, and if he hadn't have passed away, they might have been successful. You know this gentleman in the top right, everybody knows White Young. Everybody knows this one. This is the one that stumps some people. Milton Friedman says the only way to control this process is with amendments. And you say, well, did that ever work before? Would you have a gun in your home? Well, we can rephrase this. Would you legally have a gun in your home if it wasn't for the Second Amendment? Probably not. We have the first 10 amendments. Where did they come from? I know they were proposed by Congress, but where did they really come from?
States.
States. The origin is in the states. Now they said do this or we'll what?
We won't ratify the Constitution.
So you do this or we'll have a convention of states. Now the only time that James Madison was ever against the Convention of States, he didn't want to have one before it was actually ratified. That's okay after it was ratified, but he didn't want to do it before it's ratified. And so people will take that quote completely out of context and they see James Madison, they're against it. But we only have the Bill of Rights today because of a threat of a convention of states. And you finally get you.
For the same reason I was disagreeing earlier, Congress can't, in my opinion, make any rules about what goes on in the convention. They can call the convention, but they can't limit the subject, in my opinion. The way I read the Article 5, it says they can call a convention. It doesn't say, and then they can do this, that, and the other. You're asking Congress to limit the topics of the convention. Yeah, it says it right here.
I'm not asking.
Well, whoever's writing this here, Article 1 says limiting to fiscal restraints, limiting power of jurisdiction. I think this makes it unconstitutional right out of the box. And I don't think
Of
it's...
the 22 conventions before the founding, 21 of them were for a specific purpose. You go back and look, this one's on this one's on that, this one's on this. And so when people say, well, to legislatures, when they say, well, how do we know that that's all that's going to be talked about? Well, there's a couple things. The first one is when 34 states come together, if they don't have to be on the same topic, then why haven't we had a convention? Because we've had over 400 calls. Well, because the Supreme Court says they have to be on the same topic. They have to be within a certain range. They have to be aggregatable. Aggregatable? You know what I mean. And so the answer to that is those calls have not been on the same topic.
So then I will have to join in agreement with Ben that the federal government can then do whatever they want with the convention and decide that this state can have more representation than the other, if they can limit the topics of it.
Well, actually, Russell Kaplan is the first one to deal with this. Before Russell Kaplan's book in 1988, all of the sources, a lot of them agreed with this. Really, exactly. And then the person who actually looked at it and said, yes, it can be limited, was Russell Kaplan. He's the first one. That book costs $5. I'd recommend you go buy it because it's the first one to actually get down and get into the scholarship. Everything before that was commentary. Very little people were referring to the founding era. Very few people were talking about history. They were just commentating. And so Russell Kaplan was the first one, and then there's others that came along. Robert G. Nadelson, you ask him today, he has 30 years of studying this topic, and his idea is when he came to this, he agreed, his position was, your position was his. In fact, Mark Meckler, Mark Levin, Robert G. Nadelson, if you ask them what their first position was, they said, well, I used to think it was a constitutional convention, used to think it couldn't be limited, and it can run away. And when they really got in it and began to study, Robert G. Nadelson, by any measure, the most widely published on this topic, says that it can be limited. And what limits it? Just like when the 34 states that call, those calls limit the agenda. They limit the agenda and they provide an umbrella. And the best example is like when the governor vetoes 5 bills and you have a veto session. Legislators know that those are the only 5 bills that can be brought up. They're not going to bring up something else during that session because it's limited to those. Now, will there have to be litigation to prove that point? Maybe. And is it 100%?
If someone attended and said, I propose an amendment that everybody with gray hair has to pay an extra 20% in taxes, is there, I mean, there's really nothing in the Constitution that says that can't come out of the convention.
It's not in that article, but it's in history, and it's established in historical record, and we have to go back and look at what conventions of states rules were all the way through history, and we see that.
But none of that's in the Constitution, and anything could happen.
Right, but what the Supreme Court says is that when you said that, if your name was George Mason, it matters what you understood that to be, and what you understood it to be becomes, I mean, history matters is what they say. And I'm not here to argue because I've always said, folks, you know, we'll have disagreements and on one of these things. I'm really here because if you enjoy history, you're going to love to dig into these sources and see if I'm way off on left or I'm right. See if Robert G. Nadelson is trustworthy. Look at his bio. I mean, here's a man that taught himself Latin. His wife said, she finally said, you're going to drive me crazy. Just go ahead, take the courses and so on. Mostly taught himself. He got to the University of Denver and they said, no, you're not qualified to be a BS. You're actually on a master's level. He taught himself. And why is that important? Because our framers, a lot of them were Latin scholars. They knew Latin. They had phrases in their letters to their wives. They had phrases and letters to each other that to read them and understand it, you really have to know Latin. And when you do, you understand what they really meant in cases. And that's just an example, but that qualifies him to be at least the best source that I know of. Your question.
We're talking about 34 states out of 50, at least 16. If we get the 34 states to join the Convention of States, are the 16 states that are not involved?
They're welcome to come. They still get one state per vote.
They still are welcome to come, but are they going to be so
They have to be.
opposed
They're states.
they're going to fight it?
Are they what?
Is there a possibility they could be so opposed to this that they could fight it?
They can fight up to the point of where they can not pass a resolution, but they don't have any say. As a sovereign state of Delaware, they can't keep the sovereign state of Wyoming and the sovereign state of New Mexico voting a certain way, and the Constitution allows for them. The 34th state triggers that. It doesn't say Congress might, ought to call a convention. It says Congress shall. And the history shows, and Robert G. Nadelson, his opinion, not mine, is that Congress has there's several things. They have time and the place. And we all know that the final, if there are amendments proposed, Congress has discretion whether to send it to legislatures or state conventions. I'd love for them to send it to state conventions. Wouldn't you? What's their approval rating?
19.
State conventions will burn them down. State legislatures will probably, go ahead.
I only have sort of one comment, and that's on the idea that, and I've got no problem personally with using the Constitution and all the tools we have in our tool belt to try and correct the situation.
Right.
And we talked about not using fear to drive away from this. But you based your whole idea of all opposition out there to the convention is based on liberal, progressive opponents to it. Is that a fair statement to say that all of these questions that have come up in here or in any conversations that you have are necessarily coming from liberals and progressives and are maybe not just concerns of regular citizens involved in the process?
That's a fair question. And what I'm saying is, when I read the literature that comes from some of these organizations that says, okay, there's some real words that you can hear. And as soon as you hear these words, you know that these arguments, when someone uses the term open it all up, how many times have you heard that? I mean, when they say that, where'd they get that? That's in the literature. You go back and look at Charles Black's literature, and he wasn't a guy that was on our side. You look at who he was a defender of liberal causes, and he was using scare tactics to keep states from using this. Are all of these arguments in that? You'd be surprised how many are. When you look and say, well, is that really, oh, there it is. I mean, there's a lot of them.
You would agree that people who have concern are not necessarily driven by a progressive liberal agenda?
Oh, I know they're not.
Okay.
I'm never going to say they're driven by it. I'm going to say that for the most part, when that argument comes up, I can show you where it came up over there in the 70s and who did it. And the guy's name was Swindler. And he said this, and they're like, who was he? Oh, really? And so we're taking his side? You're kidding me. When you start looking at that, I have the link. If you email me, I'll make sure you get it, because when I have a copy, I've got a copy with me. It's not that long of a document. When you flip through it and you get into the meat of it, I heard this about Article 5. Now I see where it came from. Every argument, to be fair, can't say that. No, there's no way.
When you see articles about the socialism, George Soros fighting for Article 5 convention and throwing all his billions of money behind all the different organizations that's behind it, one of the opponent side can't fathom how you're gonna go into a convention that someone that you definitely not fear, but you don't line up with any of socials.
Let me tell you, I met that guy.
How can you come out of that convention or even before it, before you guys having the convention, if you don't know what kind of government or governance is going to come out of that? If if you had, well, this is what we're going after, these are the words, this is what we're trying for, then you could say, okay, well, George Soros, he's not for this, so,
He's for having a convention.
Oh, he's,
Oh, yeah.
right, but
I
if you guys are.
met the guy that works
opening-
with him in Missouri. He's from
opening-
Missouri. Have you met him?
Yeah, if you're opening up the door. to
I got him on my
guys-
speed dial. I'd love to let you talk to him. You would go,
Who is it?
really? Let me tell you what happened in Missouri. Our Senate resolution was 21, calling for the words that we've talked about. A liberal senator here in Missouri introduced 24, which was the resolution for a convention that everyone would, oh my goodness, we can't have an open-ended convention. But tied into that was campaign transparency, which is code word for redo Citizens United. I mean, if you're against Citizens United, that was what they were trying to do. They're not, they'll tell you what they're doing. And First, they blocked our resolution, and then they wanted credit for removing the roadblock, so they said, oh, we're your buddy. They brought that over. It should have never left that Senate, but it did, in a deal. Okay? It takes one person to block anything in the Senate of Missouri. It takes one person to do it. So they felt like they had to make a deal. They ran this through first. And so what happened in the House was, here's these two resolutions, one in which we're totally against, and one in which we're totally for. And guess what? That's one reason we didn't get it through, because people were confused. Does George Soros want 21? Do they want a convention to restrain the power and jurisdiction of the federal government?
No.
Do we want one that's open-ended? No. But it worked to their advantage, at least in Missouri, is the confusion kept this one from passing this year. They never could do it next year. I mean, it's part of the problem. I'm not paid, nobody else in the Convention of States is paid in any way by George Soros. The other guy, he admits it, he's Wolfpack, and he's paid with that, by Wolfpack. So, he wants to work together with us. Well, we say, we'd rather not work with you. But
Who is that?
the person who, from Wolfpack,
Well, yes, that's,
That
in
works
sports
for
and
Soros.
sports.
his name is, well, he's from Virginia. And if you watch the movie We're Not Broke, you can rent it at Netflix. He's the star.
Who is it?
Clayton.
Gotta give him that.
I'm trying to think of his name. I got him on speed. He called me several times. We went back and forth. I'm not a good name person, if you want. But I'm just telling you, if you watch that movie and you say, okay, that's the guy. It's not really important that we know what his name is. Brian Clayton is his name, but I took him a minute to think of it. Go ahead. You've been very patient. He's been very patient. I know we run out of time.
Have you considered the fact that there might be another scare campaign again, this time to prevent it? Because, you know, most of the media outlets are pretty infused and a lot of them are owned by people that would not be in favor of something like this. So is there something to combat that and to bring younger people on? Because a lot of this stuff to younger people is boring. It's not fun. And I feel that there's the bread and circuses thing going on. They're giving us all this really fun stuff to distract
You're right.
from what's going on.
There's a few people paying attention. Landon Farmer came and testified. He's 19 or 20. I think he's 20 now. And he says, I'm looking at this as I'm looking at your $18 trillion debt. He said, that's a tax on me. That's a tax on me, which I had no voice and no vote. And so he understands. There's some in that generation that understand this. But when we get together and argue, or our Fred Lloyd Sloan argues, or even Ron Calzone, or even when I'm arguing with Eagle Forum, it's not the battle. We're on the same team. The battle is going to be for the last 5 states, the last 4 states, and we will be fighting the left if you really want this to happen. And by that time, we'll either want it really bad, we'll know it has to happen, or we'll go home and go fishing. But this is not the battle. Because we're fighting with our friends. But you know, when's the last time that someone went to the recruiting office and recruited a Marine or Army, and they put them on a boat the next day, or a plane or a ship, and send them to fight? They don't do that. What do they do? They send them to a camp. What do? Fight their buddy. They throw their best friend on the ground, and then their best friend throws them on the ground. If we were fighting the left today, we would lose, because they don't fight, and they don't have any rules, and they don't have any scruples, and we're not ready to fight the left. But when it comes down to this process, this man says that, he said, this is all we've got. He's been up there long enough to know that this process is in the Constitution, it's all we've got. And when we realize that, and when we start getting down to the last few states, we won't be fighting each other. We'll be fighting the media, and we'll be fighting the left, and we'll be fighting for survival.
I believe there's hope still, because you said initially that the federal government has too much power, but the state's constitutions say that all power is inherent with the people. And so training citizens to self-govern, to speak up, to be a voice, to hold government accountable is a viable solution. Without risking the loss of 150 years of complacency, 5 decades of people who believe that we are a democracy and not a republic, putting these people into the convention is train the citizens to self-government. That's a viable solution.
You know, there are people in this room who are part of the greatest generation. A lot of people climbed out of the Higgins boat. You know what a Higgins boat is? I didn't know what a Higgins boat is, Brian. That's a Higgins boat.
Made New Orleans.
They hit a beach and they opened that door and they climbed out, and a lot of those people never came back.
Got that?
They saved the world. Surely we can call a convention. You see the difference?
I mean, it's part of self-governance.
Is it?
It's the part that we have pushed back from us because we are too busy. And it is the key, among other things.
I will agree with some folks that are opponents that saying that sometimes when we talk about this process, if we're not careful, we make it to sound like the silver bullet, like it's the fix-all, and it is not that. It's you know, we're having this discussion because we're having to have this discussion, but it's not everything. It's not. I mean, what Brian does and what you folks do every day when you're local and state and county, that's where it is. But we know this is in the Constitution. We know it's there for a reason. This
That was
man,
for a moral.
this man fought for it from the Oval Office.
If it doesn't work, what do you believe is the next step?
I'm not gonna talk, I'm not gonna go there. No, I'm not gonna go there. I just know that there's a reason to try. You don't have one of these.
I do.
I'm not grand.
Oh, great.
Now, if you knew how much fun they are, you'd have had those first. But they're fun. You have, sir.
I read something that 34 states can get together and propose an amendment. I didn't hear how the amendment gets
Okay.
passed.
Then from there, it's just a proposal. And it's very hard to get out because it would take 26 states. Now, someone said George Soros can buy this convention. First of all, we don't know who the delegates are in Missouri. We won't know until they get ready to go. And so if he doesn't know who they are, how's he going to buy them? Well, he's just going to buy the chairman. Well, we won't know who the chairman is until they get there and they select him. So how's he going to buy somebody when he doesn't know who it is? It's a pretty good fail-safe. There's nothing foolish safe. But you know, when he has to go, well, he'll just buy the votes. Well, wait a minute. I don't care how many delegates Nebraska has. Let's say they send 12. They only get one vote. They have to go over in the corner and vote and decide how Nebraska's going to vote on this topic. It's called caucus. So if George Soros is going to buy the votes, he has to buy at least 26 to make something happen. And that means he's going to have to buy all the caucus, or at least over half of them, from 26 states. And we don't know who they are yet. So when you really sit down and you put your thinking cap on and say, how can he do this? The answer is, he can't. Because we don't even know who they are yet. And he has to buy a majority of the people in 26 states so he can get what passed? Just to get it out of the convention. And then it has to pass 38 states. Now keep in mind, that's not only 75 or 76 chambers, but many states require committees to vote on it. Some states require subcommittees. So if you have subcommittees in 38 states, roughly speaking, you're talking about 228 times people are going to vote on it, and only 13 times is all it takes to kill it. Wow, it's never going to happen. Well, it can. But here's what will happen. So you distill this all down, and you say, well, what can get ratified? Common sense, something we should have been doing already, something that's pretty bipartisan.
Pretty scarce too.
Pretty scarce, all that is. But my point is, to get it out of the convention is hard. To get it ratified is super hard. Once you understand ratification and what it really takes to get it ratified, then I think most people will say, just bring it on. Whatever you want to talk about, bring it. Let them talk about it. If they can get 26 states to vote it out, fine. We'll see if 38 states will ratify it. Just takes 13 to kill it. When you understand the whole process, here's what happens to you. you take a deep breath and you relax. Because you know that it's not something that we need to be fearful of. What we need to be fearful of is the ongoing, everyday, runaway convention government that's destroying the Constitution almost on a daily basis. That's what we need. The worst thing we can do is what we've been doing or nothing. Those two options to me. As much as we are sincere and honorable people doing our best, we've not been successful thus far. The proof is in the pudding. You had a question, sir?
Well, I'm more of a comment, I guess. My main concern with this whole thing is it opening up a whole opportunity for a lot of mischief. And, you know, I'm not gonna be for something until I know what something is.
There's no mischief going on now, though, is there?
No, there's
I mean, not to be, but there's no mischief going on now. We all know that there is. But yeah, it's
And
kind
it's
of,
been going on
it's
for a
kind of
long
the
time.
unknown.
But I still do not see anything wrong with our Constitution as
No.
written and as intended. The only thing wrong with our society today is we allow the liberals to take out of educating our children the Constitution of the United States, the Bill of Rights, Declaration of Independence. And as a result, the American people have no idea. They think their rights come from Washington, D.C.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you.
And
Any statement
I
you
just-
make, yeah.
I'm very leery about all of this.
And you know what we
I
are?
would much rather see the American people educated by people who understand the original intent of the Constitution, get it back in our schools,
Right.
take the education away from the federal government, and
Yeah.
solve our
Let me
problems.
tell you what I do. I go to farm shows, and I told you this earlier. I go to a farm show and I set up a booth. I put our magazines up there, but I talk to people about convention states for several years now at this booth in different places. And people come by, and you can put them in categories. And some people come by and they don't have a clue, and some people come by, and what really helps me, keeps me going, is these people who come by and they get it. They know there's a problem. They never knew that this was in the Constitution. They were like me, weren't paying attention to Constitution class. So then they realize it, and I see them leave my booth and walk on down to the rest of the show with hope in their eyes. Hope in their eyes, and I know they're like me, that they see this as one opportunity that I heard about, where we might have an opportunity to turn things around. And to your point, the last farm show I came, a man came up, he came with his 4 sons, 25, 23, 21, a stair-step down. And they weren't Amish, but they looked like they'd been out working. And they were just absolutely, in 3 seconds, I said, "You've been homeschooled," and they all grinned. They were happy, they were proud of it. And I asked questions about the Constitution, and they knew the answers. And then the oldest one said, "I'm for the Constitution, as long as it agrees with the Scriptures." And I reached over and I shook the man's hand. I said, "This is what America's supposed to be like. People know, people work, they understand, they've applied themselves, they're not afraid. They can stand up and look you in the eye and tell you what they believe. This is what America was meant to be, until we handed it over to the state."
Well,
And that was, to me, it was an eye-opening experience.
Carly Fiorina said it, and this is exactly how I feel. The people of the United States are fed up and sick and tired of the political class in the United States.
No argument.
Now, you come up with a solution how to
Yeah.
solve that.
Well, here's our goal, and I'll tell you what happens. I'm gonna finish, you guys, I know your time is getting short, and I just keep saying that until you run me off there. But what happens when you have a local election and the state representative is running, the state senator, and nobody in the federal, how many people show up? What's the numbers? Brian knows. When you have a local election, statewide election, just a state representative and state senators on there, how many people show up? 27, I think it is. But and what happens when you put the presidential election on there, and what happens? 72. I mean, it's not really, it's probably 68. But it flips it around. People think that that's important. Our goal is to make it so irrelevant to flip it around. Your state legislature needs to be the most important person that you elect. And right now, he's not, she's not. We want to make the president irrelevant.
Ooh.
And that, stop the tape, stop the tape.
You see what I
The
mean?
NSA got that.
We want to make him irrelevant.
How many states have passed it?
3,
One state.
IRS wants to talk to you.
Georgia, Florida, and Alaska. And that's in
Oh,
38.
you said that earlier, yeah, I didn't.
And I know you'll have other questions. I'll stick around later, but I know some of you need to go home. You've been a great audience. And I appreciate you being here this evening. If you have more questions, what I really want you to do, if you wanted to keep track of what's going on, and this is the hard part. I drove 6 hours. My wife says, "What are you coming over here?" I said, "Well, there's good people who want to know what's going on, and I want them to know what's going on. And to be on a regular, I want to be able to tell you every week what's happening in the Capitol. I want to be able to tell you all the time what's going on with this issue. The only way to do it is go to conventionofstates.com. It's the website that's on this literature. Go ahead and go to the website. And when I say volunteer, that doesn't mean I'm going to call you. That doesn't mean I'm going to expect anything. That means you want to really keep track of what's going on. Volunteer. And then when I send out an update, you'll get it. And they'll let you know when the calls are. I hope you'll be on a conference call so you can ask questions and stay in tune with what's going on. But that's the only way that it helps me. If you're over here and you don't know what's going on, I have no other way to let you know unless you fill out. Go to conventionofstates.com. Sign the petition. Don't be afraid to put your email in there because it's just me that's going to send it to you. We're not going to trade it, sell it, give it away. Okay? And it's important that you put your address in there because we will link you with your legislator. We'll know who you are, what district you're in. And that's important to us, that we know who your legislator is. And at times we may say, can you pick up the call and visit with them and ask them to support this or that? And that's self-governance, and that's what we hope that you'll be willing to do. Have a great evening, and thank you for your time.
Well, I learned a lot, and it's still turning up here, but I won't shut up. If you really enjoy Mr. Carmichael as much as I did, please come back next month. The TTTT stands for Third Tuesday Tea Time. And we'd love to have you back. We're going to have another guest speaker. His name is Ryan Johnson, and he's the president of the Missouri Alliance for Freedom. He'll be speaking about the importance of ideals and ideas and activism. Plus, there'll be a post-legislative session, Jefferson City update. And then we have just a couple more things to take care of, and you don't want to leave before we find out who wins the safe and 50-50. So we're going to do the 50-50 drawing first. Who has that? Oh, Fred does. And,
Does
we're also
anybody
gonna-
want a ticket that did not get a 50-50 ticket? Last chance. Okay. Who do you think we can trust to draw a ticket? Maybe we need to pick on this guy right here.
I don't have one in there.
Well, it's easy this way because if somebody's aggravated, they're mad at you, see? That's the easy way to look.
You gotta get down there. I'm not- Reach down.